technical high
Welcome. I'm
from technical
Katie.
difficulties. I am Garrett.
And holy fuck, boy, do I need some weed.
Yeah, how topical. It's almost like you knew. We are talking about ADHD and weed today. And it's fitting because I would love some weed and Katie probably needs some weed at this point.
Yeah, it's a good thing that PK's out getting me more wine.
Oh yeah, that's good timing. Yeah, that's good timing.
Yep.
So this is a topic, it's kind of hard to find balanced researched information up. You find a
Mm.
lot of like, oh my God, weed is the worst thing you can ever do. It's like a dare program.
Hmm.
Um, and the flip side is then you find, oh my God, weed is like the greatest thing you can ever do. And there's not a lot of like large scale research that's been done, especially on this topic specifically. So I'll reference some studies, but they're all very small scale. So it's like grain of salt with all of it. And I'm going to try and kind of find the middle ground between those two perspectives. So studies show that more than half of daily and non-daily cannabis users have ADHD. And about,
Wow,
right,
that's a lot.
that's a lot. One third of adolescents with ADHD report cannabis use, and people with ADHD are 3 times as likely as their neurotypical peers to have ever used marijuana. So there was a 2015 National Drug Survey on Drug Use and Health. 22.2 million people aged 12 and older had used marijuana in the last month, which like 12 is super young.
It's very young.
Um,
It's the kind of thing where I'm like, oh, I am old because I'm like, you're too young for that, but also
yes,
that's real young. I
it's
mean,
really young.
anything really, like cigarettes, like tobacco
Yes,
cigarettes, alcohol, anything like that, I'd be like, ooh, that is
that's too
not
young.
good.
Right, because I mean, we've talked in our puberty episodes about like all the shit that's happening to your body at that point. Like
Right, yeah.
it's kind of like, you know, when we talk about hormones with, AFAB individuals where it's like a constant changing
Hmm.
landscape and there's, no firm footing. And that's kind of how it is when you're 12.
Oh,
Like
totally.
everything's always changing. So,
Yeah. And
um,
it's yeah, like not like the answer is always therapy, but like I would imagine if you're engaging in marijuana or drinking or cigarettes or something at the age of 12, it's a
there's like
coping
other
situation.
things,
Yeah, like you've got a lot of things going on that aren't ideal.
right? There's like other factors at
Yeah.
play. Um, and they're saying research is suggesting that part of the reason this use has increased over the last decade is that perceptions of like the risk of harm among the general population has steadily declined. And we know that there's been a lot of changes in laws, and there's been a lot of states that are passing either legalized use or medical use. And mental health conditions come up a lot in like the conversation around medical marijuana, but there's really not a lot of like controlled scientific studies on the effects of marijuana and mental health.
Right. Well, because it's been a Schedule One narcotic for a billion million years. So
Right. It's kind of like pregnant people. They're like, I don't know.
yeah.
Um, so there's two components of cannabis that are like important context for this dynamic with ADHD. So one is THC, which is tetrahydrocannabinol, I think. THC, which I think is a pretty generally understood term.
Hmm.
And that's the psychoactive component. So that's like that high that you feel when you use a THC based product. Um, so it attaches to those cannabinoid receptors in the brain and the nervous system. Then there's also cannabidiol, which is CBD, and that's the non psychoactive component um, in cannabis and hemp. And it acts in different areas of the brain and also kind of like counteracts the effects of THC. So it doesn't give you the high, so it's not addicting. But you have some of the same benefits that people see with THC. So that's why it's been so popular in
Hmm.
recent years. Um, so cannabis works by activating the brain's reward system and it releases dopamine at higher levels than usual. So we know people with ADHD are constantly like chasing that dopamine hit. Um, with the low levels of dopamine that we have in our brain, which is why the THC can feel like so rewarding to an ADHD brain.
Right.
So it's unknown, like how precisely, like that. I would say that's the extent that we know.
Okay.
We don't know exactly how they call it the endocannabinoid system, which they're abbreviating to ECS, could be involved in ADHD. There was a small preliminary study that found there was like a degradation of the endocannabinoid anandamide, which they have abbreviated as AEA, was impaired in a small sample of drug-free boys with ADHD. And that
We're the
AEA,
drug-free boys.
like, how stupid is that name? Like, I would roast anybody that called themselves a drug-free boy. Narc. That's what that should say.
Nerd.
Yeah. As soon as I said it, I was like, ugh, I hate that. So that AEA, that endocannabinoid anandamide, impairs memory and attention by reducing the activity of the dopamine transporter system. So the endocannabinoid system may also be involved in ADHD with that reward circuit in the brain.
Okay.
That's about as much brain science as we're going to get because there's not a ton of brain science on this.
Right.
So, there is also like mixed evidence on different strains of cannabis having different effects. They're saying that it's kind of muddled because there's been so much crossbreeding, but then there was also some indication that maybe indica strains have a higher proportion of CBD, which might be the most beneficial for people with ADHD. But again,
Right.
arbitrary
Yeah.
at
I
this
mean,
point.
until they deschedule it, they're not really going to be able to test any of those
Right.
theories
Right.
in a number that would be statistically significant or helpful to anybody.
Yeah. Like a lot of this is just like anecdotal, like general information.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, there's effects that THC, the marijuana, has effects on cognition, um, impairing attention, inhibition, memory, and like working memory, executive function. And adults who use marijuana chronically is the word that they're using, have poorer performance on. There was also somebody who wrote this academic paper and her name was Susan Stoner. And I was like, you cannot be serious right now writing a paper on ADHD and weed with a name like Stoner.
I heard a story of somebody who was in the Navy, and I guess when you're in Navy, like boot camp, like for Army, everybody's
You're
a
a
private.
seaman.
Yeah. So for Navy, instead of being a private, you're all seamen, and this person's last name was Swallows, like the bird.
No.
And it was a woman. And so apparently they like promoted her as quickly as possible so that it wasn't Seaman Swallows.
That is heinous.
It's bad.
I would definitely be changing my name. 100%.
Also, oh fuck, you said something that made me think of something. Anyway, goodbye.
So the people who were using it, I'm assuming chronically is like a heavy use long term.
Yes, that or
that.
it's the SNL skit with Natalie Portman singing about the chronic what coals of Narnia.
Poor performance on tests of attention, executive function, learning and memory, processing speed. Really, and the same thing goes for adolescents who are regularly using marijuana. And that can persist for at least 6 weeks following the discontinuing of use.
After it's chronic or just like after a single hit or whatever?
I'm thinking it's like after regular use. It takes 6 weeks for some of that to return.
That is
more normal.
That's a long
level.
time. That's
And I'll talk about tolerance breaks too, but yeah, that's that. I was like surprised it was 6 weeks.
yeah, me too. Because I feel like I mean, we can talk about it in tolerance breaks, but I've heard of those before, but it's never been like more than 6 weeks that a tolerance
Yeah,
break has been taken. So
yeah. Um, so I think the perception that marijuana is therapeutic for ADHD is like growing in popularity, but it's definitely like anecdotal. Like they did this qualitative analysis, and that was all based on like online discussions around cannabis use and ADHD. And there was definitely this like trending consensus that it was therapeutic. Um, but then when they look at other things that actually involve any form of data, that kind of like falls apart. So there was a 2020 study on adults with ADHD who took medical cannabis who found they found in that the people that took the higher dose of medical cannabis components, so like things that had a higher CBD, could reduce their ADHD medication intake, but it's like super small. You can't make generalizations about it because it's such a small study.
mm,
Um, and again, they're making these claims, but there's really not a lot of like clinical support for it. Um,
yeah.
there was a 2013 study that found with people with ADHD who use cannabis performed worse on memory, verbal, cognitive decision making, and response tests than those who didn't use the drug. Um,
Yeah.
and I do
So don't
think,
do it before your ADHD assessment.
right, or like, uh, I mean, it stays in your system. Like I would think a month,
Hmm.
just because I'm thinking like, okay, if they're doing like a drug test on you,
Hmm.
the last month is what's going to show up, but it stays in your system longer than that. And I do think there's like kind of a snake oil factor to weed. Like I think there are people who kind of excuse me, kind of perceive it and bill it as this cure all to like all of these different problems. Realistically,
Yeah.
I think it can soothe plenty of it's like essential oils. I
Hmm.
think there is an element of soothing plenty of, cancer treatment side effects and
Hmm.
chronic pain side effects. And like, I'm sure in certain levels, like depressive side effects. I think that there are some things that it can help. Like if you are in a situation where you need something to help your appetite, or, you're dealing with, chronic nausea or something like that, totally. I think that this can
Yeah.
be helpful.
It I think it can very easily go it's similar to like, I don't know, chamomile or lavender. Like I have that in
Hmm.
tea all the time.
Hmm.
And they've also been linked, like chamomile has been linked to like anti-inflammatory benefits.
Hmm.
Um, so like a lot of people with arthritis will use like a lotion with chamomile on it on their
Hmm.
hands. Same goes for, like even peppermint. Like, yeah, peppermint's for flavoring, but it can also help with nausea and it has a
Right.
cooling effect when applied
Is it going to
topically.
like solve my migraine condition? Probably not.
Right. And like as we discussed in our essential oil episodes, that's an olfactory response within your brain, not
Hmm.
just that this one herb solves the problem, is the cure, can fix everything. And I think with weed, and I think maybe I see it more just because of being in like those ADHD forums, but it can, like you said, be billed as this like cure all where it's like, oh, it
Hmm.
helps me with my focus and I'm sleeping better and I'm able to, pay attention and I don't space out and I'm better at cleaning. And it's like, well, I mean, are you, or are you in
Right.
like a cognitive deficit so you think you're better at cleaning, but your place is still a mess?
Right. And like I know my therapist had mentioned the brain waves, that it's slowing your
Yeah.
brain waves down like alcohol does.
Hmm.
So it is making your brain in that way maybe less jumpy
Hmm.
and less maybe you're slightly less impulsive.
Hmm.
I know like on a personal level, and obviously this is anecdotal, um, I find weed to be like the most effective like when I get home and I'm like amped
Yeah.
and agitated or frustrated or stressed. to like be able to just take me down like, okay, like a deep
Yeah.
breath. Okay,
Well,
let
and
me
I think,
decompress a little bit. Like a lot of people use a glass of wine.
yeah, that's what
Like
I do.
just yeah,
Yeah,
like bringing the temperature down.
it's like a type of stimming, like when it
Yeah.
becomes a habit like that,
Hmm.
like I don't need the glass of wine. There's plenty of nights I don't have wine.
Hmm.
Um, and it's not that big of a deal, but like when I'm super stressed out or like I really need to vent about something, like last night I had the wine poured by the time PK got home because I was like, wait till you hear this. Um, but it I think there's a lot of um there's a big risk, even like we said with essential oils, because it's hard to do like a double blind with
Right.
anything like that. But there's a huge risk of it being a lot of like psychosomatic placebo
Hmm.
effects that are being reported, where it's like, oh, it totally takes the edge off. However, that being said, when it's slowing your brain waves and you're really like hyper and
Hmm.
hyperactive, it makes sense that that would help you take a deep breath and assess and like really just kind of take a load off, because as we know, there's a significant overlap between anxiety disorder and those people with ADHD. So it it's not out of the realm of possibility that something where it's, a short half-life as far as the immediate effects that you feel on your body,
Right.
would be able, is something that can be used to help you manage moments of stress.
Right. And I don't think like I know if, and I'm going to talk about tolerance breaks in a minute, but
Mhm.
I know that I'm due for a tolerance break when it's not taking the edge off my anxiety and it's making me more anxious.
Mm.
Because to me, I don't notice any benefits to my ADHD. Like I think mine is really like more anxiety based that I can like
Mhm.
kind of lower the temperature a little bit and like take a deep breath and kind of get ahead of the and I think it also does kind of help me um because I'm lowering the temperature, put things in perspective better. I find mentally the biggest impact I have, like I can focus really great on like one thing at a time. So
Mhm.
like cleaning is great. If I have the house to myself and I can just spend the whole day kind of floating around and not worrying about, and we've talked about that before, like I
Yeah.
will, that's kind of one of the times where I like let my brain relax and I'm not trying to focus and
Mhm.
keep myself on task. I think that weed helps lower some barriers in my brain. So I think my creative thinking is better. I think
Okay.
that it like opens my creative thinking a little bit and I might make connections that I would not normally have made um mentally. But
Mhm.
I would not say it helps my ADHD. I think it just helps take the edge off. But if I maybe I'm going through a stressful period and I'm doing it too much, it's going to have the opposite effect. And
Mhm.
when I notice that, okay, it's taking more and more for me to, and I'll be honest, like maybe a couple of hits after work is usually the extent of my use. But when I'm noticing it's taking more for that same effect, I'm like, okay, it's time for a tolerance break. Um, and that tolerance can happen within just like several days of regular use.
Oh, wow.
Um, in
Which
some,
is also kind of, again, like I said, I've never heard of a 6-week tolerance break.
mhm.
So, if it's in your system for 6 weeks, then like you're ramping up your tolerance faster when you don't have a full break
Oh
between
yeah,
using,
right. Like you're
like,
not coming down to a baseline in between.
right. So, yeah.
And it affects they call it the CB1 receptor. Um, and it's saying that research suggests that after tolerance develops, it can take several weeks of THC free recovery for that receptor expression to return to its baseline levels.
I had no idea. Like, my mind is fully blown that it affects your brain chemistry for so long. I'm amazed.
Same. Yeah. So this says because of tolerance, the eventual downregulation of CB1 receptors with chronic use means that any benefit derived from THC with regard to mental health could not result in symptom exacerbation when users are not under the influence of THC. It's like you really do have to give yourself kind of additional time
Yeah.
in that time. Because I would normally like, and I was not, I think there's also a factor of this that the weed that's available now is not the same weed that I was buying like in high school from one of my friends. This
Right.
is like laboratory created strains that are much stronger with higher levels of THC that are being grown in like very scientific ways. So,
Yeah, and it's consistent. Like you can get the same pre-roll in the same strain every time you go to the dispensary, and what you get out of that is the same every time, as opposed to,
right.
again, like whatever. I remember my uncle saying a couple years ago that because they all smoked in the 70s, because duh, it
Mhm.
was the 70s and they were in high
Yeah.
school. But he said that he hasn't like smoked a blunt in 30, 40 years. And he was on the Cape and on Cape Cod, and it's fully legal in Massachusetts. Well, I don't know if it's fully legal, don't quote me on that. It's
Oh,
legal
no, I
for
think it is.
recreational
Yeah,
use
no, yeah,
anyway.
yeah.
I don't know
Yes.
whatever, but
Recreational use is
somebody
legal.
offered him a joint that he rolled, and he took a couple hits off of it, and he was like, I was immobile. He's like, I couldn't move.
My
It wasn't
legs
like that
didn't
when I was a
work.
kid.
Yeah, no, it is
And it was,
way
he said,
stronger.
he was like, I was unprepared. Like it was, and it was
Yeah.
like,
And
it
then
just
you
hit him
add
like a ton of
in,
bricks.
there's things like, so smoking the flower is probably like the least potent way to get it. I mean,
Hmm.
you look about something like,
The
you look at
pens
something
and
like
stuff. Yeah.
pens or like like doing dabs, like that is super, super highly concentrated. Like I kind of like laugh because I mean, and not in a way of judgment, but just like I'd have to take tolerance breaks for the little itty bitty baby bits. Like an eighth lasts me forever. And I will take tolerance breaks from that for
Hmm.
a month or two at a time, just to like
Right.
let my body clear and like come back to my baseline, which I did not have scientific evidence for that. It just felt like that's what I should be doing.
Hmm. Well, right. And I mean, I know
Um,
I told you about stories of people that I know where, I mean, the amount of edibles that they were doing on top of a a fat blunt, on top of a dab pen, on top of vaping and all this other stuff, and I was like, I would be just dead. Like I would have to be in the hospital. There's no way that I don't know how you reverse getting
Turns
high
out you
from
can
pot.
overdose.
Yeah, like truly. Like
Yeah.
I would be like the cartoons when, like in old-timey racist Peter Pan, where they all smoke the peace pipe and turn green. That would
Yes.
be me. Because like
Yes.
just one of those edibles was like 70 milligrams.
I would die.
Well, that's just it. Like I had 10 milligrams and I couldn't get out of a 4 foot deep pool without
Right.
assistance.
But, and I think, I mean, when you compare it to, and I think I have like conflicting opinions on it because I do feel like, okay, this is an organic substance. So I
Mhm.
do feel like the toxicity is less than binge drinking, say. I think the effect is much worse binge drinking because that's like not only mentally affecting you, but there is like very much a, toxicity to your liver. And, people always joke about like pickling your brain. I mean, I think that there's a much more pervasive systemic impact of, say, binge drinking. But I think that there is a comfort level with weed use. Um, Whereas if you had somebody using alcohol to that extent, it would be more noticeable. I think it's bad either way. And there is something called it's kind of dumb to me that this has its own thing, but they're calling it cannabis use disorder. And they
I've
say
heard
30,
that in like passing.
and it 30, it says 30% of the people who use marijuana may have some degree of it. Which really, when you read the descriptions, it's it's just another name for like an addiction.
Right. Like I think it probably, I know that I've heard that they call alcoholism alcohol use disorder in a lot of clinical settings now, which I think is where they're getting cannabis use disorder from.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
But it also sounds even sillier to say like, oh, they're a weed addict, like they're a heroin addict, like it, okay, like it's
And that's
weed.
what I'm saying. Like
Like,
I think the
but
levels of toxicity, I think there's definitely a difference in like potency
well, I
and
will say though, if you are smoking marijuana, however, whether you're getting, especially I think if you're getting it through a vape pen or a dab pen with the concentrated oil,
mhm.
you don't know what you're doing to your lungs. Like you are
Oh
still
no,
inhaling
yes.
something, and we know that your lungs don't tolerate that well, even though it doesn't have,
Yes.
formaldehyde and whatever the fuck else they put in tobacco cigarettes.
But people are getting
Um,
like popcorn lung and
right.
collapsed
You
lungs
can still
and
get very ill from
yes.
that. And if you're smoking it the way somebody with alcoholism is drinking and is
Right.
binge drinking, then you probably are ending up with some systemic issues.
Right.
And we just don't know, again, because we haven't been able to study it, because
Right.
researchers have to like get a fucking NSA clearance basically to get
And
enough to like
vaping
study
is
this shit.
relatively new also. Like that's not a
Yes,
it's not like smoking where we have like 100+ years of information on. Um
yeah,
I
for
know
sure.
like personally I have never liked vaping. Um I won't use it if if given the choice because I specifically don't like the way it makes my lungs feel.
Mm,
And I do wind up with like my sinuses wind up inflamed. Like again, if I need to take a tolerance break
mm.
and it's taking, and it's gradually taking more and more, my sinuses flare up. I'm like, okay, it's time. It's
Yeah.
time for a break.
No, I
And
agree. And I think there's definitely, I think culturally there is that kind of thing where it's like, well, it's just weed and like blah, blah, blah.
mhm.
It's very easy to brush off. But like I've definitely said to people, like, if this was alcohol, we'd be having a different conversation. So like,
And even then, I mean, I as a person, like as I've gotten older, um, and I drink, I've never been a heavy drinker, but drinking less, you start to notice other people's drinking more.
mhm.
And I even like and we talked about this before, but even like in TV shows, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe they're drinking that much. But
Yeah.
it's like, it's or the time of day or whatever it is. Um, and I think there is a level of, and I think alcohol and weed have that in common because they're not like hard street drugs or really heavy duty prescription drugs,
Mhm.
that there is a level of um trust that goes with the use of them. And I think it's very easy to lose track of how much you're doing and how much is like actually healthy. Like you go to the doctor and they ask you like how many drinks do you have a week? That's very different from, oh, well, I only have like a couple of glasses after work. And then you're like, oh shit, that alone is 10 drinks a week.
Mhm. Yeah,
And that's not even
exactly.
counting weekends.
And it's that kind of like reality check that has for sure even adjusted my own perception of like what my
Mhm.
relationship is with alcohol, where I'm like, ooh, as like I get boxed wine, but it's very easy to lose track of how much you've had to drink when you're pouring it out of a box and you can't see how empty the bag is getting inside.
Mhm.
So and effectively there's no bottom to it. There's a bottom to a bottle. If you could just get a
Yep.
regular 750 milliliter bottle, that's what, 3.5 glasses.
And there is like, I mean, we do know that people with ADHD are at a higher risk for like those addictive types of behaviors. So there is a higher or an increased risk of this cannabis use disorder. And really, I'm not even going to go through the symptoms because it really sounds like a dare program. Like it's just, if it's interfering with your life and you're using it too much, I
If
think
you
it's
turn
if
into a
you
fried egg on your couch.
yes,
Yeah.
every day at all hours. Um
Turns out you're just pregnant.
Yeah, there's also that. You might be pregnant. Um, and people with ADHD, were found to use cannabis 2 to 3 times more than adults without. So obviously you've also got then, so you're more likely to be seeking it out and you're more likely to have a problem. It's something to like be aware of.
And it's like what we mentioned in the Cannibal Cop episode, where if you are continuing to exercise those reward pathways with something that is not beneficial to you, then those pathways are going to get more worn down. You're going to get more use out of them. It's going to be harder to break that habit and that just that muscle memory kind of thing.
And it winds up turning into part of your routine.
Yeah.
That also is like something to be aware of. So I was also looking at, you know, kind of the dynamic between if you're medicating and weed, and if you're using weed instead of medicating. Obviously there's like no documentation on if you're using it as a way of treating your ADHD. I'm going to go out on a limb and say no, because we know, you know, the cognitive effects that it has, ADHD aside, it actually causes a lot of the same symptoms. So the poor focus, you know, poor executive function, your working memory has a hard time. Like those are all things we're dealing with anyway. So, there's also not a lot of data on like cannabis use with ADHD medication. There was some like adverse, unpredictable, like cardiovascular impacts, but I couldn't really find anything specific. And there's also some information that was saying that cannabis could cause stimulants to be less effective, which makes sense.
Yeah. You only have so many receptors in your brain, like if you're in La La Land. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and they're saying like there's really not enough research to consider it safe and effective as a treatment for ADHD. And obviously, like, it's worth having a conversation with your healthcare provider or having a healthcare provider that maybe has a knowledge of benefits and risks of cannabis use. Because, like, ultimately there is, like, you know, primarily, you know, most of the ways that people are using cannabis, they're inhaling it somehow. So there's obviously, like, you know, a risk to your lungs. And there's definitely a cognitive risk super long term.
It's like demonstrated by Garet.
Yeah, I'm like trying to like close some of these extra things on my screen. Oh my god. I wish that was the reason. I'm also realizing that it's not like drinking where pretty much after the baby's born, you know, you can be nursing and drinking at the same time and it's fine, like unless you're like really hammered and you're blacking out, which I, even at my peak of youth, was never doing. Weed, on the other hand, stays in your system for 30 days, so you cannot nurse and smoke pot. So I have realized that my roughly year-long break is going to be probably a 2-year break, depending on how long I nurse.
You know, that's a silver lining that you can look forward to if for whatever reason nursing doesn't work out for you. You can at least you'll be able to get back into it a little bit faster.
And I will have no tolerance for anything. So I'll be a cheap date for quite a while.
Bullshit, alcohol, weed, no tolerance.
The tolerance for bullshit, which I would not say I ever had a high tolerance, is significantly less now.
Yes, it is.
Significantly.
Yeah. Although I was pretty spicy this week at work. I had
You were.
Yeah.
Yep. And I am, you know, I think with maturity, you wind up finding creative, and I have found less confrontational ways to be spicy while still communicating my point. So I'm just looking at that as I'm just refining that skill.
Good for you.
I'm just becoming more and more spicy in maybe a less aggressive way.
Yeah. I mean,
oh, holy shit. Do I do I miss having a stressful day. Being able to get home and just do a couple of hits and then take a deep breath and feel my neck relax and kind of put things in perspective real quickly and settle. That I do miss.
Yeah. Soon you'll be doing ballet classes with me on YouTube to relax.
That's like all of my tools that I would normally use are not at my disposal right now. So, I would go to the gym, burn off some steam, or, lift weights, or, any one of the things that I used to do. And now can do really none of those things.
You can sit on one of those big medicine balls and bounce around.
So I did get one of those, and it's funny because it showed up in my feed the other day. I had said to my spouse as I'm sitting there bouncing on it, I was like, man, this is like a good stim thing. Like this is a good fidget item because I'm like moving, and it's also like a soothing movement. And
yeah, remember that episode of The Office when Dwight had that in his ball?
He's right though. It is so good. And it showed up in my feed, one of the ADHD pages I follow, and they were saying how it's a really good STEM item. Because it is like you're getting out that. And they also talk about like balancing activities are really good for ADHD.
Yes. Yeah.
And this is also that. So it's like, it's great. I love it. Plus it like is comfortable because it's like a soft thing to be sitting on.
Well, and especially like you get like where you are in your pregnancy at this point, you have so much pressure on like your hips and low back, and it like can support that and allow you to sit in a way that, you're sitting upright and not, suffocating yourself by leaning backwards, but also,
and making a baby martini. Just shaking.
Or I was thinking like ice cream.
That too. I'm really looking forward to my first postpartum drink.
That's fair. Yeah. We have, well, I mean, we're close, but we'll have our very fancy bottle of champagne for when we hit 10,000 downloads. So, hopefully, I imagine that'll happen right around the time the baby is here.
Probably. I'll probably also be bringing a small bottle of champagne to the hospital with us.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
And I will
just don't use a sword to open it.
Those videos are wild. Wild. The confidence that people have with these things is like, I know, too confident.
Yeah. So in the meantime, make sure you're rating us 5 stars and leaving us a review whenever you can, and follow us on Instagram at The Bar is Ankle High. Check out our merch at bit.ly/anklehighmerch. And you can join our Patreon because while Garet is on maternity leave, all of our Anklet and Limbo Champion members will be getting ad-free episodes because we won't be doing Dysfunction Junction episodes. So you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/thebarisAnkleHigh. And until next week, take a tolerance break.
Take a tolerance break from all kinds of things.
Yeah, because the bar is ankle high.
Bye.
Bye.